Hello and welcome to this episode of SBJ Live. I'm Dan Kaufman with Sports Business Journal. This is behind the NBA All-Star Game with Kairos live production platform. Thank you so much for being here. If this is your first SBJ Live episode, welcome. I have a couple instructions for you that I will go over in just a minute. If it's not your first, thank you for coming back. And I'm sorry you're going to have to hear my instructions again, but I promise they're very quick. These are the instructions, and this is the best way to make the most out of this 30 to 40 minutes that we have with you all. One, and they're both related instructions. One, there's a chat bubble on the bottom right-hand side. We would love it if our attendees, you out there in the audience, would introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know who you are, what you do, where you're coming from. And if you see people who you know in the chat who are also messaging, feel free to message them back. We love that type of interaction and engagement. Two, again, these are related. There's a questions bubble directly to the left, at least in my view, of the chat bubble in the bottom right-hand corner. That's where you should submit your questions for our panelists. This is meant to be interactive with you, the audience. I have questions, but we don't only want my questions. We want your questions and your interaction as well. So submit your questions in the questions bubble on the bottom right-hand side, and you can upvote questions that you see in there if you want to make sure that we get to them. We will not wait till the end. There's no specific Q&A portion. We will weave the questions in throughout, okay? So give us your chat, give us your questions, and we will have a great episode here. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Emily Wright. She's the Director of Broadcast Engineering with Pacers Sports and Entertainment. Hello, Emily. And Chris Merrill, Director of Product Management with Panasonic Connect. And again, this is behind the NBA All-Star Game with Kairos live production platform. I'm going to give each of our panelists about a minute to introduce themselves, and I will start in alphabetical order by last name. Chris, you're up.
I'm happy to share some time with you. It's been exciting to be able to discuss with Emily the success that's been going on there. As you mentioned, I'm Director of Product Management, had a long history in broadcast technologies and working with a variety of different manufacturers around the industry, but really excited about where we're headed with the new things that are coming from Panasonic Connect.
Thank you, Chris. Emily.
I'm Emily Wright, Director of Broadcast Engineering for Pacers Sports and Entertainment, and excited to be here as well. We partner with Panasonic to recently renovate our control rooms. They helped provide quite a few pieces of gear. So we've got some cameras as well as switchers from them, and we used them for the All-Star Game. So excited to talk through how that worked, and it was a successful event for us and for everyone involved, and excited to be here.
Thank you, Emily. I see people introducing themselves in the chat. Keep it going. Hey, Miles, Windsor, Justin, good to see you. Thanks for being here. If you guys have questions or if anyone has questions, make sure that you pop those into the questions bubble directly to the left of the chat bubble, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. What I want to do first, though, is I want to cue a video. And Emily, why don't you prompt this video and tell us what we're about to look at?
Yeah, so here is just behind-the-scenes footage from our control room. This is our in-arena production control room. We operate for any of the screens in the bowl and surrounding concourses at Cambridge Fieldhouse. So this is just a little behind-the-scenes look at the technology. This is the Kairos specifically. You just saw the frame and the Kairos creator. And then our multi-viewer wall with all of our sources, and then just our technical director putting on a show. I think we shot this at one of our previous Pacer games recently, just to see behind the scenes and kind of give you guys a little bit of visual look into our control room. We're really proud of the renovations that just took place. We renovated over the summer ahead of this NBA season start, and we produced the All-Star Game on a completely new system for top to bottom. Yeah, so excited about all of that, and we completely transitioned from baseband to IP as well. So it was a big step for technology in our space, and then our crew had to learn a lot and all the gear that we used.
Thank you,
I love this clip. It's always fun to go behind the scenes and see how all the magic happens. And it's not just the flashy buttons and the big monitors, but just the energy that happens in those control rooms. It's amazing.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Chris. Emily, you mentioned one thing, and that's going to be the next part of my questions here. You mentioned the renovation, which I think is very interesting to talk through. So I want you to take us through that process of the renovation. This is a two-part question. You also mentioned on a previous call that we had on our prep call, the idea of like team repositioning, right? Like taking parts of your team and rethinking how they are positioned, not literally, but how they are positioned from a work process standpoint within your organization. And both of those things, it sounds like, were important and certainly were augmented by the ability to use the Kairos platform. So start with the first one, the renovations, and then we'll jump into the second one. And Chris, of course, I want you to jump in here as well as Emily tells the story.
Yeah, happy to kind of go through the process and what we planned. If there are questions, yes, definitely stop me, because it's a long saga of how we got here. Our building actually planned a multi-year renovation to become what we now call the Field House of the Future. So the building went under renovations about four years ago, and they did 3 phases. So a phase a year, we completely renovated the entire building, but our control room space and main equipment room, as well as studio, was not included in that Field House of the Future renovation because the timeline just wasn't quite right. So we actually ended up renovating our area and our main equipment room, as well as the 2 control rooms that we operate out of, the summer before this past NBA season. It put us in a little bit of a tight timeline because we knew that we wanted to be completely renovated, entire building and studio area before the All-Star game. But we had some timelines we were working against with gear that made it prolong a little bit into the entire summer leading up to the NBA season. And so there were a few thoughts that we had in mind. First of all was the physical space that we're operating out of. We could not change our footprint. So the space that we're operating out of, we evaluated how is it working? Do we need to make some shifts? And we did. We had a really segmented area previously. We had a bit of an equipment room, operations space, control room, equipment room, operations space, control room, then some surrounding rooms. And it made it difficult to keep the equipment cool. It made it difficult to keep the operations spaces and control rooms quiet or warm. We were always freezing out our crews, and especially me, always cold down here. But we decided to actually alter the physical space. So that was the first element. We were going to make some construction changes. We broke down walls, changed up the layout so that we created one centralized main equipment room. We did stay operational almost the entire time through construction, which was pretty impressive. Very proud of that. We shut down for 4 days to be offline, get the gear that needed to remain functional up and running and protected from the elements, because it was pretty wild. Should have got you guys some video of the construction footage. We had some of our guys breaking down walls with hard hats on. All of our crew and staff has been here for a really long time. But so first component, physical space, we had to change that out because it just wasn't functioning well for us. So we had a lot of change in mind. Next came the gear and technology component. The last time this area was renovated was in 2012. And so in 2012, they did a great job picking technology that was forward thinking at that time. So we wanted to do the same in this renovation, but even better, right? So we wanted to make sure we are progressing forward and making steps to innovate, but then also allow our teams to be creative. If we're just doing the same thing over and over again, yes, we have season ticket holders. They're going to get tired of that, right? If you're a new person in the seats, you see it once, great, okay, awesome, love it. You see it every single game. We want to add some variety. We want to make sure everyone's engaged and really enhance the experience for our fans in the seats. So that was a big focus on the technology and the gear side, but we also wanted to have some scalability and flexibility because we don't always just handle Pacers events, Fever events, basketball games. We do a lot of them, but we also have other clients that we're working with. So we need some scalability. We'd hit a lot of our limitations, gear limitations and bandwidth limitations in our previous control rooms. So we wanted our crew and staff to be able to be creative and not be limited by, well, this is all I had before, so we can't add an extra channel of this, or we can't do another replay, or we can't add a graphic. So scalability was at top of mind, and then creativity. So I was obviously excited about making some changes. You mentioned that we structurally changed our organizational work chart to include IT. We talked about this previously. So our organization also made a strategic shift in where our broadcast engineers report to. So we moved into the technology team with our more traditional IT staff. And then we work to support any broadcasting clients or in-arena production clients. And that includes our in-arena productions for Pacers home games, Fever home games. Our G League team has now been playing out of our arena, so those games as well. And so we wanted to build a foundation that's able to change, right? Like be adaptable and move with technology, but also provide our broadcasting crew and staff reliability, comfort. We really partnered with Panasonic early on to bring lots of training because this is something that takes a lot of trust, and you don't want to step out onto a ledge with something you don't feel comfortable on. So Panasonic really helped us when we were considering what gear to pick. Wasn't necessarily the switcher we had in mind before planning the renovation, right? As we were going through the gear list, I actually had a call with one of the Panasonic representatives, and they mentioned they had a switcher. Would I be interested? And we're trying to be open to all ideas at this point. It may not have been something we would have sought out on our own had it not been brought up to us. And so I think being open to exploring non-traditional options is very valuable. It's worked out really well for us because we said, yeah, let's take a demo. We'll see how it works. And it was right as we were picking gear. I mean, like everyone was on the verge of, hey, I'm voting for this one. I want this switcher. I want this camera. We threw a demo in there that kind of shook things up, and it really appealed to our technology side and IT team because they could relate to a lot of the behind the scenes that Kairos was offering. And then our more traditional broadcast AV crew, I think everybody on this call probably could imagine what their initial thoughts were, switching to a less traditional broadcast switcher. Chris is laughing because I know you feel that it's hard to make that jump. I mean, to really want to try something new. So even after the demo, we had several skeptics on our team, but we decided to push forward with it because that was important to us to try something that is innovative, it's creative. And then as we were reflecting on what do we really need, we struggled really hard to be creative with our traditional broadcast switcher from the previous renovation in 2012. So we had two traditional broadcast switchers in both of our control rooms. And honestly, we only had one or two people who were proficient on it. So if we wanted to create something new, build a new game for halftime or one of the timeout breaks, next game, we'd have to either hire someone out to help us do that or have the one person on staff who has other responsibilities at this point step in and come help. So we didn't want to be hemlocked by that moving forward. We wanted to be able to be creative and offer gear that our crew could use.
Yeah. Emily, I'm wondering if I can jump in and just transition it to Chris a little bit, because you mentioned a couple things that I know Chris is going to want to hit on. And speaking as broadly as possible, Chris, some of the things I heard Emily say are, transition and difficulty of transitioning. Talk to us about that process from a general perspective when you approach a customer and think about transitioning to the Kairos system, and then talk about some specifics, maybe playing on some of the specifics that Emily mentioned.
Yeah, she's brought up some really good points that I think apply to everybody. I've got an expensive piece of real estate, right, that I need to use as much as I can. So I've got to bring a lot of different kinds of events in. I've got to be able to scale it as needed. That implies change inside of that content production system that happens on a regular basis. So the set it and forget it kind of model doesn't work. And then I'm also from event to event, I've got a lot of content to create. If I'm not showing my audience the same thing every time, so they're getting bored, how do I continue to generate that rapidly? So there's a big burden there of content creation, and at the same time, my team's changing. I can't just rely on a couple of people. And so how do I manage those kinds of things in a traditional setting? And that's where those things were starting to break down for Pacers. And it is for, I am assuming many of the people on this audience, because as we're talking to folks, that's what we hear all the time. And so that ability to work through those problems requires an ability to easily change, to easily adapt. And so it involves a lot of things. On the technology side, that means that technology has to be easy to use. It means it has to be easy to deploy and add things to or take things away without, breaking the full system. Those kinds of things for us. Yeah, it's part about the user experience, but it's also it's the reason why we recommended for them the 2110, IP technology, because it allows you that scalability and flexibility that isn't necessarily there with baseband SDI, where you have to kind of build the largest system you can and hope that it's enough. And so that there's a flexibility that comes inherent with some of that new technology, but as she also pointed out, then that becomes scary for people. Mm-hmm. So getting involved and working together through those problems makes it a lot easier, because there's absolutely a cultural change that has to happen as you move forward in that new technology deployment.
Chris, great points. Emily, I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the maybe budgeting issues or any other type of resistance that you may have had when you first started thinking through this process. Was there resistance from a budgeting perspective? Talk to us about some of that resistance, or from an organizational perspective, tell us how you overcame that resistance, possibly in conversations with Chris and team.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody who's put together a project knows there's budget constraints, no matter if you have a super high budget, super low budget, whatever you're working with, you've got to meet that budget constraint. And so, yes, we were absolutely operating with budget concerns in mind. And we're also operating with how can we get the most out of these dollars? Like, what is going to make the most impact? It is specifically why we bought gear 4K capable, right? But we did not actually shift to 4K because we felt our dollars could be better spent elsewhere to actually make an impact on what our viewers and our in-arena fans are seeing and actually experiencing. So we didn't feel like our dollars being put to necessarily just a 4K experience would be seen, pun intended, as quite the step up that we were looking for. So we invested a lot into our technology backend. And like I said, we did some physical modifications. So that cost money and took money out of the budget just to modify the space. But we're looking for long-term cultural shifts as well as operational change. So we felt it was necessary to take the bit of a hit on the physical space to make it a better operational side, to make sure we could take care of the equipment better. Keep it cooled. We have aisle containment cooling now, and it's all in one space. So when you go back into the equipment room, that's where you freeze. Okay, you don't have to be freezing in the main equipment room, and it's not leaking out and wasting our efficiency in terms of cooling. So we really took the long-term approach with how we wanted to position ourselves, but we were looking for what's going to make the most impact. And buying the most expensive switcher or the most expensive products of anything we could get was not on our list of reasonings of why to buy, right? We were trying to find what can we do that functions well for us and still fits that budget. And so Panasonic worked with us, especially because we have 2 control rooms. And then we also partnered with them with our PTZ cameras. So storytelling is something we also wanted to improve upon. Creativity, storytelling. We've added 7 robotic cameras. So we had 3 previously. We now have 10 total. And we use the Panasonic PTZs for that. So we've got other pieces of equipment that helped in that process, as well as budgeting and getting all the things that we needed.
There's a lot of things that come with, I'm going to go back to that comment on technology and IP, really, in this sense. Some people are kind of worried about IP, and I get that because it's new. But as I mentioned earlier, you don't have to build the largest system possible right from the get-go, right? So that really helps with budget. It actually is less expensive to deploy. I'm not putting down these massive bundles of cable and some of those things that are required in order to do an initial deployment of an IP system. And so it provides a lot of ability to be flexible and then to grow as needed. So it's capable, as Emily said, but if we're not using it today, why do we put in all the other things that we need sometime in the future? Let's add them as we need them. And that IP allows you to do that. We were just talking before the before this event started about the fact that we actually have two different control rooms. Both of them have Kairos in them, and one of them actually is more like an auxiliary studio. But they have the capability at some point in the future of actually running those together if they wanted to do a master production, or break them apart, and one's for some other event, or maybe it's sending feeds to the outside broadcast director. Whatever that is, it gives you this ability to adapt the system as you need it for that moment.
Yeah, we really do change it up quite a bit here. So at this point, we have not used our two control rooms as one larger unit together, but it's something that we offer outside clients. If we're not going to be producing an in-arena production out of our main control room, we could actually put the two rooms together and use all of the resources for a larger broadcast or a stream or an event that needs more resources. So it actually helped us, gain tools to provide for our clients that are coming into the building. And then it's also given us the flexibility to take on our G League team. So our G League team is actually moving locations, and they're playing with us in Cambridge for this season. Currently, it's over at this point. For the G League, unfortunately, our team didn't make it too far in the playoffs, but next season as well. So we were able to do an in-arena production, also a stream or a broadcast for the Mad Ants at the same time. So that was really actually crucial in our functionality as we transitioned our G League team while they're getting a new arena built. So we're capable of doing two shows at once. We can do one larger show. We do feed video coaching signals when we're not using our secondary control room with the Kairos around the building and to our truck dock. So it really does give us a lot of adaptability and flexibility. And then any one of our staff or crew can sit down there and build what we need. So if I need to change up the graphic on video coaching it's a high school event perhaps, or it's something that we're not typically doing, so it's not that norm save, show that we load up. They can build it really quick, operate, put it out, and we're ready to go.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Earlier you had mentioned in the previous system, you basically had two people who knew how to make those kinds of changes.
And only one on staff.
Yeah, so. Staff was sort of on call. And so to be able to just say, oh, we've got somebody coming in today and they need this, can you throw that up? And we can do that right away. Just that simplifies.
It's really helped with, again, the culture shift and the mentality of let's be creative. What can we do? I think we started out with this renovation. We have some fresh engineers and newer members to the team who are excited about, I can give you all these resources. What do you want? What do you want? And our team being used to, I only had this many channels before, or I only had this many sources before. So let's do that. Well, what if I give you this?
Yeah.
Kind of starts the wheels turning of, okay, well, if we do have that, maybe we would do it this way. Okay, well, let's shift that around. Let's try a new camera look. Let's try additional sources into the switcher. What are we going to do? And we've gotten a lot more creativity and just gotten away from, well, that's just how we've done it, right? And that's just how it is. And that happens in any organization, I think. Some stagnation there.
I'm throwing on my business hat for just a minute. It's not creativity just for creativity's sake, right? Which that's fun and that's great. But really what it's doing is it's giving people a reason to be in the venue, right? It's pulling new business in because it's different than what I can get at home on my couch. And so it's another reason to come is because they can do this. They can make it look better. They can handle our branding. They give us a better experience than we can do on our own. And so we need to be there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we are definitely working with our marketing teams and digital teams. We almost have to showcase what we are capable of now, because in the past we didn't necessarily have all these elements that you could sponsor or sell or graphics that we could build on the fly. So right now we're working through that as we transition and get more comfortable with our new system. What else can we sell? I mean, what else can you put sponsorship on? What else can you help get products out into the arena space using our equipment?
Emily and Chris, we've got a couple audience questions that I want to make sure we get to, but this discussion has been great. I think both of these questions probably are best to go to you first, Emily, but Chris, feel free to jump in. The first one is from Chandler Fowler. Chandler says, can you talk more about the transition from baseband to IP?
Yeah, definitely. That was a big decision as well. So it talked about sort of the fear of change. Live production has some stresses to it. You definitely want to make sure you understand the technology that you're putting in as well as the gear so that you don't have questions when you're operating and in a live event. But we did ultimately decide it made sense for us to move away from baseband to IP. Like Chris talked about, the scalability is really nice. We do need some flexibility, and we don't necessarily have, a bunch of extra money to spend on things that may or may not happen, right? So sometimes things come at us quickly. We have to adapt and change to it. So IP made sense for us in that term. But it is quite a change on the troubleshooting. So I'm traditionally from a baseband background. Partnering with our IT team and traditional technology side, I think has really helped us gain a better understanding for the networking side. We've also brought on some engineering staff that had experience with IP in the media world, so that was really helpful as well. But if you are specifically looking at transitioning from baseband to IP with no IP experience, it's a totally different mindset for troubleshooting. So that's something I would really look at, evaluating the pros and cons for your staff's knowledge base, what your goals are to come out of it, because if IP doesn't fit into it in the long run, like maybe it isn't for you, but for us it made sense, especially with the shift that we're doing technology wise and staffing wise. But it's a totally different ball game in terms of troubleshooting. I myself am still learning quite a bit about IP, almost a year past installing this system.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear this question because it changes sort of by market vertical. Mm-hmm. Some verticals are all in for IP and have gone that way for some time, but other verticals are still at some other point in the adoption curve, which is fine. I understand that the technology and the knowledge is there, but you've got to know who to ask in order to be able to understand what it is, because it is as Emily was pointing out, it's a different mindset. That's primarily on the networking side of things. If you look at the operator's experience, then I think what you should also have that discussion, because from the operator's experience, it should be pretty seamless.
That's a really good point. Yeah,
and,
it's
and
more
I
on the
think
engineering back end.
I know earlier you had mentioned that there was a worry of, okay, I've got a new panel, how does it work, et cetera, and that turned out to be the least of your worries because that
very much so. Yes, and our crew and staff admits that now. I was telling these guys before on our prep call that we should have done a before and after of our staff's reaction to the Kairos, because that would have been the best marketing video ever for Panasonic. I mean, people really were concerned. They weren't sure how this was going to work, right? Because we have this traditional mindset of how a switcher is supposed to work. And now we're asking you to change that and create your own mindset, because anyone who sits down, we can change the panel up for whoever's operating. And you can operate it differently per quarter. You can operate it differently per game, per person, however, but you do have to shift how you think about it.
Yeah. I think it also speaks to the importance of picking the right partners, right? Because it's not a journey you want to do on your own. So have people who've done this to help walk through that. We spend a lot of time on the Pacer site doing training and just kind of walking through all of the different questions. We had people on site for the All-Star event, and they enjoyed the event. They did really nothing, but they were there because
it worked out really well.
It was a worry, and that's okay. That's part of being a partner, is being there when those concerns arise. So.
Yeah, as we considered our final decision on the switcher, training was the ultimate selling point to get everyone on board. Was we'll put in as much training as we need to get this under control and make sure that everyone feels good about it. And so we opted in for as much training as we could get. And ultimately, it was valuable and we needed it, but I think we did overkill on the training. Frank's been here, the trainer who he worked with most, so many times. I think we could have gotten him a contractor badge, but it's been great. He's been helpful in our entire staff learning and creating things here.
Yeah.
We've got another question from the audience that I will get to in a minute. And if there are more questions from the audience, please make sure you submit them. I've got a couple more questions, including I'm going to ask Emily and Chris for their SBJ Live actionable insights to take away from this conversation. But before we get there, Lawrence Kaiser has a question here. Emily, I think this is more for you. Did you consider partnering with a larger group that specializes in full service, i.e. Live Nation?
So I'm not super familiar with Live Nation in terms of all that they offer, but no, we typically do handle all of our in-arena production ourselves. So we partner more with the broadcasts that are sending feeds outside of the building. And we do have partners in that realm helping to produce those products. But for in-arena production, we're strictly using our Pacers sports and entertainment staff and crew for that.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks for the questions, Lawrence and Chandler. Emily, I wanted to ask you about some of the news recently, which was the announcement that the Pacers and the Spurs will play in Paris in 2025 and a couple of games.
Exciting.
What does that mean for you? How does that affect your team? And the answer might be not really that much, but I want to hear.
Yeah, so at this point, not really that much likely. In the past and likely moving forward with a game like this, we want to bring our atmosphere and our people there to put on the show. But technically, we don't have necessarily any of the capacity to handle. So not sure that I will have anything to do with that technically, but we will definitely be sending our crew over to make sure they bring the experience that the Pacers have to offer in Paris. But we probably won't be bringing the products, unfortunately.
Fair enough. Best of luck.
It'd be interesting to have that conversation. We have several customers who are doing remote production, right? In fact, we're doing a lot of the in-venue experience for the Olympics this year as remote production. But also here in the States, there are several organizations that are using their local control rooms for production and like showing that event locally as well. So it might be fun to have that kind of a conversation.
I was going to say, maybe we should talk a little bit more after this call and
we'll see
what options we have, see what we can do in Paris.
There we go. Developing business right here at SBJ Live. All right. To the audience, thank you so much for being here. We've got one more question. We'll get the actionable insights from Emily and Chris to take away from this conversation. But thank you to the audience for being here. This will be available on demand after this. And we have these episodes nearly every week, or at least twice a month. We try to aim for, and we've got another one next week as well. I hope you'll join us for that. Why don't I start with Chris? Chris, give us your actionable insights. What do you want the audience to take away from this conversation and use in their day-to-day?
Yeah, I think there are two things. One, IP is coming, right? And even if you feel like that's not for you today, you should be ready. And therefore, start talking to people, understand what it can do for you in those terms. And then the other one is begin to partner early. I think a lot of the success of what we were able to do with the Pacers, Emily mentioned that we kind of squeaked in at the last part of there, but from that moment, it was full-on engagement the whole time, right? And so that is an important part of a successful installation of any type is walking that group that path together, and so make those decisions and bring folks in early because it will really help in the long run.
Thank you, Chris. Emily, the last word is yours. What do you want to leave this audience with in terms of actionable insights?
So I think for my actionable insight, it would be just be open to change, open to looking directly at what you're doing, what your goals are for you and your team, as well as your organization, and then devising a plan that makes sense for you. It can be pretty daunting, especially because the broadcast industry is well established, right? We've been broadcasting for quite a while. IP is not necessarily as established in an industry or with industry standards, but you're looking towards the future and getting familiar with it. So be open to change and evaluating what makes sense for your organization, your crew, and your goals, I think is my takeaway, because if you just follow what the standard is for the broadcast norms, it doesn't necessarily play out for everyone well. We had traditional gear and switchers in the past, and we couldn't make them function. So what is the fear? We could make them function. That was a little extreme. But we were not as capable of being creative as we are now. And so what was the fear? The fear is we wouldn't be able to use it. Well, we weren't using it to its full capacity anyways. So let's try something new. And I think culturally, that's also something that's important for the broadcasting realm is let's try to build some baselines where our crews feel safe to make a mistake. That's really tough because mistakes are noticeable in broadcasting, right? So we don't want to mess up. We don't want to make a mistake. But if you can bring your crew and have a baseline of try it, let's try it and see, and then we'll reevaluate and go forward. I think that's really a big help in making these changes.
Emily, thank you. Chris, thank you. We couldn't do it without you. Panasonic Connect, thank you very much for the support. To the audience, thanks for being here. We hope to see you next week. Have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.